Very good morning, dear students. I hope all of you are fine and safe at your home. This is subject economics, chapter number first, that is graphs in economics, and this will be our lecture number third. In previous session, we discussed everything about the graphs and diagrams, in which we discussed the basic terms of the graphs and diagrams, where it is used, and examples of discontinuous frequency distribution and continuous frequency distribution. Before move forward to the next topic, let us once discuss the difference between these 2 points as we discussed in previous session. I told you in previous session that in next session we'll discuss about the difference between diagram and graph, and which will be based on are textual only. So let us start the difference. This difference between diagram and graph is textual basis. So it may happen that each and every word which is used in textbook will be taken as it is in this diagram, in this difference, and you have to write down this graph and diagram either along with we are discussing, or you may pause the video and write down one by one each and every point in your book, because you have to compulsorily read and learn this this difference. Now let us start. The first one is a point of difference. First is diagram and second one is graph. In point of difference, first point is scales and measurements. So as we discussed that in diagram, scales and measurements are used while drawing a diagram. But one thing to remember here is that exact and proper scale and measurement is not at all required in diagram, because basically the diagram is drawn from the self-explanatory data and exactness is not required, but we have to be very cautious and proper while we are drawing a diagram, and that's why scales and measurements are used while drawing a diagram. Same way in graph, perfect scale and measurement, because the graph is based on statistical information, and that's why we need to draw it perfectly, and that's why perfect scales and measurements used while drawing a graph. Let us discuss the second point, that is knowledge of statistics. So in diagram, thorough knowledge of statistics is not required to draw and understand, because basically the diagram is for the purpose of giving understanding and awareness to general people, and that's why the proper knowledge or thorough and detailed knowledge of statistics is not at all required to draw or to understand the diagram, while the graph is based on statistical information and we have to use different tools and methods, and that's why thorough knowledge of statistical tools and method is essential to draw and understand a graph. So the second difference is that in diagram we doesn't require a thorough knowledge, while in graph it is compulsory to have the thorough knowledge of statistics. Third one is types of data that are used. So diagram is drawn for data which are presented in discrete, that is discontinuous frequency distribution. As discussed in the point diagram also, that basically the diagram is drawn for the data which are presented in discrete, or we can say discontinuous frequency distribution, and its example is already discussed in previous session itself, while graph is drawn for data which are presented in continuous frequency distribution. An example of continuous frequency distribution we already discussed in previous session. Fourth one is use of data. Generally, diagram is drawn for self-explanatory data which is easy to understand, and anyone can understand the self-explanatory data and relationship between independent and dependent variable. While graph is drawn for information which are not self-explanatory and difficult to understand, because the data which are used in drawing a graph is basically statistical type of data, and we required simplified that data before we draw a graph, and that's why graph is drawn for information which are not self-explanatory. Fifth point is use of graph paper. So basically in diagram, graph paper is not necessary to draw a diagram. It can be drawn on any simple paper, whether it is in your fair book or at any simple blank piece of paper. You can draw a diagram with proper measurement and scales. While for drawing a graph paper is compulsory, and as we discussed that graph can be extended up to 4 quadrant that can be used with the help of intersection between x and y. So graph paper is compulsory for drawing a graph. And last one is purpose of drawing a graph or purpose of drawing a diagram. So basically diagram is used by advertising companies, government and social organizations to bring awareness among the people or to give different type of information, while graphs are used more by researchers and educationists for the further studies and further research. So with these 6 points we conclude the difference between diagram and graph. First one is scale and measurement. In diagram, scale and measurement are used, while in graph perfect scale and measurement used. Second, knowledge of statistics. In diagram, the thorough knowledge of statistics is not required, while in graph, thorough knowledge of statistics is compulsory. Third, type of data. Basically, diagram is drawn for the discrete or discontinuous frequency distribution data, while graph is used for continuous frequency distribution data. Fourth, use of data. Diagram is used for self-explanatory data, while graph is drawn from the information which are not self-explanatory. Use of graph paper. So basically graph paper is not required in diagram, while graph paper is compulsory in graph. And last one is purpose of drawing. So diagram is used by advertising companies, government agencies and social organizations for awareness, while graphs are used by researchers and educationists. So I hope you have written all these points, and not then please write down this point by pausing the video in between. And now let us move towards the next topic. Now let us start discussion about the importance of diagrams and graphs in economics. Till now we have discussed the basic introductory paragraphs of graph and diagram, their example and their basic knowledge. Now we'll discuss the importance in economics. So the importance of diagrams and graphs in economics can be stated as under. First importance, the study of the subject of economics, which is perceived as difficult and complicated, is made easier by way of diagrams, and less confusing, that is clearer, by way of graphs. Here we are discussing the importance of diagram and graphs in economics. Basically already in introductory paragraph we have discussed the importance itself, but here point wise we are discussing. So first point says that the study of the subject of economics, which is perceived as difficult and complicated. Basically I know and I remember about your first day in standard 11th when I entered into your class, and at that time, by listening the name of the subject economics, your expressions and your feelings. Same way, I can understand that the subject economics is very much difficult and complicated, because all the relationship, that is cause and effect relationship between different variables and independent variable and dependent variable, plus totally theoretical subject. Here we are studying whatever given in textbook only, or we are studying only the some part of the particular subject or topic, while the subject as a economics is a very wide and complicated. So this subject is made easier by way of diagram. Just imagine if in standard 11, in chapter demand, supply and cost of production, if there is no diagram at all, then how to understand these particular topics? It becomes very much difficult and complicated. So with the help of diagram and graph, we can easily understand the subject economics and can clear our confusion about the different parameters also. Because whatever the subject complicated it is, let us talk about the science. In science, maths and science, you are applying your mind. Why? Because they are practical in nature. Same way, if economics is totally on theoretical based and not at all any of the diagram or graph or any kind of picture is given in this particular subject, then it never become easy for anyone to understand. So first importance of diagram and graph is that the complicated and difficult subject economics can be easily understood with the help of diagram, and we can clear our confusion with the way of graphs also. Second point, trends of certain economic parameters over various years can be observed through a single diagram or graph. Here let us talk about the macroeconomic variables. That is, chapter number 3 is about the inflation. Chapter number 4 is banking. It is okay, but chapter number 5th, 6th and 7th, that is poverty, unemployment and population. Now, if we want to observe and analyze different type of poverty along with the frequency of poverty, then we can easily understand with the help of diagram. Like, let us take the example of population of different years and different parameters. Like trend of population after independence, that is the data that in 1951 the total population of India was 36 crore, then in 1961, 1971, 1981, 1991, in 2001 it is 102.70 crore, and in 2011 it is almost 121 crore. So all this data, see, let us read this second point again. Trends of certain economic parameters over various years. So here we are discussing the trend of population growth of overall 70 years, starting from 1951 to 1911, or we can say 2011, or we can say 2021. So during these 70 years, the population growth and the percentage of population or total number of population can be easily understood with the help of diagram. First of all, we have to make a data table or a list year wise, that is in 1951 total population, 61 total population, 71 total population, and likewise. Amongst this data, we can easily plot the independent variable on x-axis, that is year, and dependent variable, that is population, on y-axis, and we draw a simple diagram which shows the population trend. So, trends of certain economic parameters. Along with this, the poverty level, unemployment level, inflation, etc. Different economic parameters over various years can be observed through a single diagram or graph. We can easily compare, analyze, and interpret all the data from one graph only. In higher studies, basically, different types of theories and explanations can be done with the help of diagrams and graphs. Even in last question of your board examination paper will consist of a diagram in which the data table in the form of table will be given to you and ask to you that to draw the diagram or graph and interpret it. Say for example, the population of different years is given in a data table starting from 1951 to 2021. Then with the help of data, first of all, you have to prepare a proper diagram with proper scales and measurement and then to interpret it. Further, in next few sessions, we'll discuss that how to interpret this data, but you can easily show the different parameters of different years or so many years with the help of a single diagram or a graph and can easily interpret it also. Now let us discuss the point number 3. Point number 3. Changes occurring in various sectors of the economy can also be easily understood. Various sectors of economic, basically in India, the sectors are distributed in 3 types of different sectors, that is primary sector, industrial sector and tertiary sector. Initial years of planning, or we can say after independence in 1951, if we check the contribution of all these 3 sectors in the GDP or national income of country, then the highest contribution, that is 53.1%, comes from agriculture, then industrial and then service sector. But if we check the analysis of various years in various sectors, then in 2015-16 the highest contribution in economic or GDP comes from the service sector, that is almost more than 60%. Then second one is agriculture sector with 26%. So initial years, the contribution of agriculture in total GDP was more than 50%, which reduced to 26%. And in initial years, the contribution of service sector, which was almost 26%, is increased to almost 65 to 70% in recent years, can be easily traced with the help of economics and diagram and graph. Say for example, if we draw a time series graph of particular sector contribution in GDP or employment, then easily we can trace that in which sector the contribution is increasing year by year or in which sectors the contribution is decreasing or diminishing year by year. So the changes in various sectors of economic, that is primary sector, secondary sector or tertiary sector, can also be easily understood with the help of diagram and graph. Here there is a possibility that we can draw the diagram or even graph for this particular same kind of data, and we can easily understood the trends of different sectors. So this will be also easily understood with the help of diagram and graph. Fourth one, a comparison can be easily drawn for the distribution of some economic parameters between group, classes, regions, sectors as well as time periods. Now here in previous topics we discussed that the changes or trends or different studies can be done. But how can we differentiate between the countries which are developing, developed, or underdeveloped? So for that comparison, it is compulsory to have the data regarding different countries, their contribution, their economy, their production, their GDP, their population, and everything. Same way, within a country, how can we analyze that these are the richest class of people, these are middle class, these are lower class? Or how can we differentiate between educated and uneducated person, literacy or illiteracy, poor people and rich people? For all this type of data, the comparison between two classes or two groups, two regions, or two sectors as well as time periods can be done with the help of graphs and diagrams. Like comparison can be easily drawn for the distribution of some economic parameter between groups and classes. So here let us take the example of income class. Upper class, middle class and lower class. How can we differentiate? We can differentiate on the basis of their income level. And for that income level, we are deciding different categories and different group of people like male and female, literate and illiterate, malnourished people and routine people, etc. thing can be compared along with different regions. Like in India, we are having different states. So basically, we are comparing the states. Like say for example, nowadays, as the pandemic is widespreading, every day we are getting a data of number of people infected in different states. So on that basis, we can make the comparison that amongst all the states, Maharashtra is highly affected, Gujarat is third number affected, then different cities. So this kind of comparison of different economic parameter also, like pure, or we can say the richest state or the poorest state or the average state, etc. So the different regions comparison, different sectors which we discussed in previous topic itself, as well as time period, that the population of Gujarat in 1951 and population in 2011, number of poor people in 1951 and a number of poor people in 2011. So along with the different classes or groups, different regions, sectors, we can make the comparison with the help of different time period also. So for that comparison, we required a basic diagrams and graphs which can easily analyze and interpret all this information. Point number 5. When many aspects of economics which are found apparently difficult are presented through a diagram or graph, the time and effect of the presenter in explaining and of the reader in understanding this aspect is saved. Here, when many aspects of economics which are found apparently difficult are presented through a diagram or graph. Let us take the example of pie diagram. Basically, the pie diagram can be drawn for the data which are make total of 100. That is, all those data whose total is 100, we can easily draw a pie diagram. Now, if we want to make a proper distribution channel, or we want to analyze proper distribution of income amongst different class of people, as the income is 100%, but when it is divided into different class of peoples, apparently it becomes difficult to understand. But with the help of pie diagram, we can easily understand on which particular sector or on which particular data we are distributing more. Let us take another example. If the income of a person is distributed among different expenses, like for necessities, comforts, luxuries, savings, investment, education, etc., etc., Now their total income is 100%. If we make a data table on it, then also it apparently difficult to understand on which sector or on which particular item we are spending much and on which particular sector we are spending less. But when we are drawing a diagram, that is divided bar diagram or a pie diagram, then we can easily understand this. So when many aspects of economics, till the time in above 4 points we discuss single comparison only. But when at the same time total number of population, amongst them male and female population, amongst them literate and illiterate population, amongst them different age group, etc., classifications are done simultaneously, then also at the same time we can present it through a graph and diagram. The time and effort of the presenter in explaining, because when you are explaining this type of data, at that time the presenter has to take a little bit pain to explain all this data to the audience. So the time and effort of the presenter in explaining and the time and effort of the reader in understanding these aspects is saved, because with the help of diagram and graph we can easily explain or make others understand regarding the different parameters of the same point. So the best example is the census survey of 2011, which is based on caste and creed, and for that the data of this can be easily presented by the way of graph and diagram. Now let us move towards the sixth and last point. Certain difficult principles of economics are very easy to understand with the help of diagram and graph. For example, the concepts of expansion and contraction of demand and supply, price elasticity of demand and supply, etc., are made easier by the way of pictures, and the trends of macroeconomic parameters can be clarified by way of time series graphs. For instance, the short run and long run irregular fluctuations in agriculture or the regular fluctuations in some industry are calculated by the method of time series, and their trends are presented by way of time series graphs. So basically here we are revising the topics which we have already discussed at the time of diagram and graph concept. Certain difficult principles of economics are easy to understand with the help of diagram and graph. So when we started discussing of demand in standard 11, initially it was very difficult to understand the inverse relationship and downward sloping graph and etc. But like for the concept of expansion and contraction of demand, that is when price increases there will be the contraction of demand, and when price decreases there is an expansion of demand. Price elasticity of demand, the different types of price elasticity, that is the percentage method of supply, etc., are made easier by the way of pictures. We still, even till today, we remember all this particular diagram which we studied in standard 11, because with the help of this diagram we are easily interpret and understand the data, and the trends of macroeconomic parameters can be clarified by way of time series graph, like the population trend, unemployment trend, poverty trend, etc., are macroeconomic parameter can be easily shown with the help of time series graph. For instance, the short run and long run irregular fluctuation in agriculture, because as we all knows that our agriculture is totally dependent on monsoon and rainfall, so there will be irregular changes, that is some production or rainfall is higher in some of the years while in some of the years it is very less. So that irregular changes or the regular fluctuation in industry, that is due to business cycle, that is depression, boom, recession, recovery, etc., are calculated by the method of time series graph. and their trends are presented by way of time series graph. So certain difficult principles can also be understood with the help of graph and diagram. So here with this particular topic we are concluding our session. In today's session we discussed 2 points. In first point we discussed about the difference between diagrams and graphs, which is the most important question, and in second point we discussed different important aspects or importance of diagram and graph in economics. In next lecture, that is in lecture number 4, we are going to start with the aspects to be considered while drawing a diagram and graph. Till the day you have to remember and learn the difference. First of all, you have to write down the difference as we discussed and then learn it, and in next session we will discuss from aspects to be considered. Have a nice day and thank you very much, class.